welcome to Mental Health Chats. I'm Clare Davis, and I'm here to help you bring better emotional fitness into your life. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. If you're listening on podcast, please follow. This series is on trauma and PTSD, and I'm all about helping managers in organizations to help themselves and help their teams to spot the signs, have those conversations, and bring better emotional fitness and more positive mental health into the workplace. Today, my guest is Bianca Rodriguez. Hello, Bianca. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
I'm so excited to have you, Bianca. And Bianca is going to be talking to us about treating trauma. So first of all, people may have noted your accent. Whereabouts are you calling from, Bianca? Where are you from, first of all?
I'm originally from the East Coast, from New York and Connecticut, but I currently live in Los Angeles, California.
Wow, so the other side, how exciting.
Yes.
And I've been to both sides, so that's brilliant. I know both
They
areas.
both are wonderful in their own ways, but the weather here is like, you can't beat it.
No, you cannot. You cannot. So trauma and PTSD, can you tell all the people who are listening and watching what your definition of trauma is, please?
Yeah, absolutely. The definition that I use is based on how, most people in my field, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. So in the field of psychology, we look at trauma. Trauma is not actually an event. Trauma is an experience that happens within a person due to experiencing a traumatic event. And when a person experiences a traumatic event, and this could be something where you felt like your physical well-being or your emotional well-being somehow is threatened, right? That could look like living someplace where there is a war going on, and that can also look like living in a household with a caregiver that possibly struggles with addiction, struggles with anger stuff, and is a scary person to be around. Trauma occurs when often we feel like we cannot escape and we are powerless in a situation. And so we've experienced a situation like this, then we internalize it usually. And this affects what we call the central nervous system, which is really just a fancy way of saying your brain. But your brain is not just in your head. Your brain is an entire system that runs through your body. And so based on this experience that you have, it affected how you think. It affected how you react. It affects how you regulate your emotions. And that's usually the experience of trauma that we talk about. Now, post-traumatic stress disorder is a common diagnosis that a person that has experienced trauma can develop. But as you and I chatted in our pre-talk, having PTSD is actually not as common as you would think. More people experience trauma in their life than have the full-blown diagnosis of PTSD, because there's a lot of criteria a person has to meet the full-blown diagnosis of PTSD. But that doesn't mean that if you don't have the full-blown diagnosis of PTSD, that you are not deeply impacted by the traumatic experiences that you have experienced in your life. And so we can see a lot of other mental health conditions that result, such as substance abuse disorders, generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, phobias, other things that occur as a result of experiencing a traumatic event or events. Yeah.
That is so interesting, because so often we think of PTSD due to a traumatic event. And you've defined that so beautifully. And we've had quite a long discussion on this prior to this. And you explained to me the difference between acute trauma and complex trauma. So if you wouldn't mind just explaining to all the people who are watching and listening out there, because this is just as interesting. So please do.
So most of the folks that I work with and that my peers work with have what's called complex trauma. And complex trauma basically means that a person experienced many traumatic incidences. It's almost like a faucet that drips. So if a person grows up in a household that is emotionally abusive, physically abusive, both, perhaps being sexually abused repeatedly, that's considered complex trauma, where a lot of the time it's not just this one event, but it's this trickling effect, this dripping of ongoing that creates this internal experience for a person, where really most people that experience trauma, right, they don't feel safe in the world and they have difficulty regulating their emotions, which can look like hyper arousal or hypo-arousal. And hyper-arousal is sort of that anxious kind of high intensity kind of experience that a person may have, where hypo-arousal can be sort of that freeze, maybe turning inward, isolating impact. And so acute trauma is literally when a person has maybe one event, like maybe somebody was in a really severe car accident or was, assaulted, walking down the street. And acute trauma is really just one time event that created that sense of, right, unsafety, fear, right? And the dysregulation could look like being triggered if somebody was assaulted by somebody saying, let's say, wearing a red sweatshirt. Anytime you see somebody in a red sweatshirt, right, you might be like, right, you may have this hyper vigilant response to that. And that's why we talk about, what happened is not as important as how a person internalized it. And sometimes there's an event that one person might feel was very impactful and traumatic, and another person might not. And one person isn't wrong and one person isn't right. It's really subjective. But that idea of like a dripping faucet to me is like complex trauma, where there's a lot of experiences that have led to this person's, overall perception of the world as being unsafe. And they're feeling like the world's a dangerous place and I can't handle it, right? It shifts your entire perspective, which then also shifts your how you react to things and how you can regulate your mood. Things feel much more triggering ongoing when you've had this experience of the world being unsafe and feeling powerless, really ongoing.
Wow, thank you. That's a really, really detailed explanation. And what I'm intrigued about is, how can people diagnose trauma? What can they do?
How can they diagnose it within themselves?
Yeah.
You know what's interesting? I use something when I work with clients. It's called the Adverse Childhood Experience maybe checklist. And I'm pretty sure it's free online. And it actually is a series of questions that it asks you things like, did you have a parent that used substance abuse? Did you, I don't know, experience any, I don't even know what's on there, serious deaths, or witness anything, I don't know, traumatic like that. But it's very specific, and it actually helps a person assess if they experienced any possible things in their childhood that could be diagnosed as trauma. I would also say too, if a person is listening right now and relating to any of this at all, I would say if you can access mental health care, talk to a professional clinician and they can help you diagnose whether you have experienced trauma and how that's impacting your life now. Because that's the thing, is that, even if something happened 20 years ago, it's the fact that a person didn't process the experience that leads to the current symptoms. So if you've experienced trauma, it's not like, well, you're screwed, I guess that's going to be you the rest of your life. I wouldn't do the work that I do, right, if I didn't know and didn't get to see on a daily basis that you can heal any trauma that you've experienced. Any trauma, you guys. I've worked in the foster care system with children who have had some of the most horrific histories that you could ever hear. And everybody, I believe, is capable of healing anything that has happened to them. It's just a matter of identifying that something did happen and then working with somebody who's trained and who's skilled that can help you process what happened. Because a lot of the time, right, like in that red sweatshirt example, a person, not everybody in a red sweatshirt is dangerous, but your brain hasn't fully processed what happened to you. So in order to keep you safe, it's like everybody with a red sweatshirt, everybody with a red sweatshirt. But the goal of people that have experienced trauma is feeling like, yeah, if the world can be a dangerous place, but I can handle it. And that's the most important thing, is that we learn, like, we can handle it. And there's a lot of different levels as to the work that we do when we work with folks that have experienced trauma.
That's absolutely brilliant advice. So if anybody who is out there watching it or listening to this can identify with anything that Bianca has said, it's getting
Mhm.
professional help. So that could either be identifying in themselves or identifying with people around them, and it's helping
Mhm.
those around you get the professional help as well. So Bianca, thank you for your very wise words of, you're just incredible. You've written
Thank
a
you.
book, haven't you? Would you like to tell everybody about your book?
Oh my gosh. Yes, I would love to. I will have to say there's a real connection between substance abuse, addiction, and traumatic histories. I work a lot in the addiction space here in Los Angeles, and I recently wrote a book that's called 30-Day Sobriety Challenge. And this is for anybody that wants to look at their relationship with alcohol, just to explore their relationship with alcohol. We live in a society where alcohol is used to be social, to have a good time, to take the edge off. And then it can become a habit, and a habit is something that we do unconsciously. And so this book that I wrote, it's fun, it's accessible, and it can just help you observe, look at, explore your relationship with alcohol. This doesn't mean you're an alcoholic. It doesn't mean you'll never drink again. It's more about, how do I build healthy habits? How do I have a relationship with alcohol where I am in the driver's seat? And so, yes, you can get it on Amazon. I'm happy to share the link with you. And yeah, I've been told that it's been really helpful for people with using it with sugar, with, any other type of it, shopping. All of it just really has to do with the mechanisms in the brain that, get activated. They light up like a Christmas tree when we're acting unconsciously and we're trying to meet our needs with something outside of ourselves, when really the answer is inside of ourselves.
Oh, brilliant explanation. Thank you so much. So would you like to tell everybody out there as well what you actually do? You work with so many different types of people, don't you, Bianca?
I do. I do. So yes, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I call myself a holistic psychotherapist because I like to work with people in a holistic manner, which is I take into account the mind, the body, and the spirit, and how all those things are connected, and how wellness looks like an integration between all of those things. I work with people that have experienced acute and complex trauma using an incredibly powerful intervention called EMDR. Stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's an evidence-based practice that's been used with veterans, with all different types of folks with trauma. I've been a patient of it personally, and it changed my life. I work a lot with folks with addiction, women with anxiety disorders, and I also love me some teenagers. So if you have some teenagers in your household that could use a little support, because that's a difficult time to navigate, I work with folks with young people as well, kind of 14 and up. Yeah.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Bianca. And where can people find you?
You can find me at You Are Complete. You got to write the whole thing out. I don't use any of the shorthand that the cool kids use. It's YOUARECOMPLETE, either.com. You can get in touch with me there. You can also find me on Instagram at You Are Complete.
Thank you very much. You have really opened up my eyes to what trauma actually is. So thank you, Bianca. We're always learning about mental health. So thank you
Yeah.
and take care.
Thanks.